Hello everyone, my name is Philip.
And my name's RJ.
We did our project on the history of gladiators and the games, and we are here to tell you a little bit about them. So gladiators in the games were commonplace in ancient Pompeii and the rest of the Roman Empire from 105 BCE to about 404 CE. Everyone from the poorest of peasants to the richest people in the cities would go to fights and cheer for the fighter they favored. The Etruscans of northern Italy originally held public games, which featured such events as gladiator battles and chariot races as a sacrifice to the gods. The Romans continued the practice, holding games roughly 10 to 12 times in an average year. Paid for by the emperor, the games were used to keep the poor and unemployed entertained and occupied. The emperor hoped to distract the poor from their poverty in the hopes that they would not revolt. The gladiators were usually slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Occasionally, the gladiators were able to fight for their freedom. Criminals who were sentenced to their death were sometimes thrown into the arena unarmed to serve their sentence. Many gladiators went to special schools that trained them how to fight. A few gladiators boxed. They used metal gloves to increase cutting and bleeding. Some gladiatorial contests included animals such as bears, rhinos, tigers, and elephants and giraffes. Most often hungry animals fought other hungry animals, but sometimes hungry animals could also fight against gladiators in contests that were called phonations. On rare occasions, the animals were allowed to maul and eat a live human who was tied to a stake. So now, after I told you a little bit about the history of the games, Reviews is here to tell you all about the different types of gladiators.
There were four main types of gladiators: the Samnite, the Thracian, the Murmillo, and the Retiarius. The Samnite class was named after the great Samnite warriors that Rome had fought and beaten in the early years of the Republic. Interestingly, the Romans, at least in the early days, used gladiator and Samnite as synonyms, suggesting an alternative origin to the Etruscan for these contests. The most heavily armed, the Samnite had a large sword or lance, a large square shield, and protective armor on his right arm and left leg. The Thracian gladiator had a curved short sword, and a very small square or round shield, held in the fist to deflect blows. The Murmillo gladiator was sometimes known as the Fishman, as he had a fish-shaped crest on his helmet. Like the Samnite, he carried a short sword and scutum, but had armor only of padding on arm and leg. The Retiarius had no helmet or armor other than a padded shoulder piece, and he carried a weighted net. He would try to entangle his opponent by throwing the net and then stab with his trident. Gladiators fought in particular combinations, usually to provide a contrast between slower, more heavily armored classes such as the Murmillo against quicker, less protected gladiators such as the Retiarius. There were many other lesser types of gladiators with various combinations of weapons and armor, and names changed over time. For example, Samnite and Gaul became politically incorrect when these nations became allies. Other types of combatants also included archers, boxers, and the bestiarii, who fought animals in wild beast hunts. Now Phil is going to talk about winners and losers.
So in the fights, there's obviously winners and losers. And after a fight, the losing gladiator, if they were not killed outright, would often ask for mercy by dropping his weapon and his shield and raising a finger. His adversary could then decide to be lenient, although as there was a significant risk of meeting again in the arena, it was considered good professional practice to kill your opponent. If the emperor was present, then he would decide, although the crowd would certainly try to influence his judgment by waving cloths or gesturing with their hands. Raised thumbs and shouts of mite meant let him go, thumbs down, and iugula meant execute him. Victors in the contest, particularly those with many fights behind them, became darlings of the crowd, and as surviving graffiti on Roman building indicates, they were particularly popular with women. Cases of affairs with aristocratic ladies and even elopement were not unknown. Graffiti from Pompeii gives a fascinating insight into how the gladiators were seen by the general public. Oceanus, the barmaid's choice, or another, was described as Decus Pullarum, Suspirium Pullarum, the delight inside for joy of girls, and also written were how many victories some attained. Petronius Octavius 35, Severus 55, and Nasha 60. However, it should be noted that the average was much lower, and there were even some games in which victors fought other winners until only one gladiator was left standing. More material rewards for winning one's contest include the prestigious palm branch of victory, often a crown, a silver, sheathed with prize money, and perhaps after years of victories, even freedom. And here's a little bit about after the games ended.
A monk named Telemachus, who hailed from the east, upon coming to Rome, was horrified at the cruelty of the gladiator games. Even though Christianity had been made the official religion of Rome by Emperor Theodosius in 380 AD, the games had continued. According to the writings of the 5th century bishop Theodore of Cyrus, Telemachus ran into the middle of the gladiator games and tried to physically stop the gladiators from fighting. The spectators were so upset that they stoned him to death. The Emperor Honorius was so disturbed by the murder of the holy monk that he banned the gladiator games from that day forward. They were never resumed.
After giving all of this information about gladiators in the games, I hope you have a better understanding. The end.